folks. Welcome to the Daily Coin. My name is Rory, and today is Wednesday, March the 16th, 2016, and I have the great honor and distinct pleasure of having back on the show for another update, Mr. Louis Camarosano from smallgold.com. How you doing, Louis?
Rory, I'm doing grand. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Well, we're
Excellent.
gonna get into some of the Silk Road and India and Kazakhstan, and we're gonna look at some of the gold and what's going on with the Eastern flowing gold. You about ready to jump in?
Let's do it, Rory.
Let's do it. All right.
We got China, India, and Russia.
Well, I wanted to look at. There's two things that I wanted to look at, Louis, and one of them is India, and the other one is Kazakhstan. And the reason I want to look at Kazakhstan is because Kuz Jansen put out a great piece yesterday on China and Kazakhstan are now trading gold along the Silk Road, the new Silk Road, and that's a pretty big deal. But let's take a look at India, and you've got some numbers on what they're doing right now, and then I've got some comments that I'd like to make.
Okay. India is probably the most historic gold nation, Rory, right? I mean, they're the ones who revere gold. They're the ones up until recently were always the number one gold consumer. And interestingly enough, they don't even have any gold mines, substantial gold mines. So basically, India is importing its entire demand. And what makes this story more fascinating with Indian gold is that not only do they have to import it, they have now over 1 billion people. So the number of people in India has increased. The gold culture has stayed with that population increase. But then what you also have is a burgeoning middle class of people that can actually buy gold. So the number of people that can buy gold in India today is far more than it was, let's say, in 1980. So the demand for gold is immense. The mentality of the average Indian person is that gold is wealth. You can wear it, you can store it. It's part of the wedding seasons. There's seasons for Diwali where they give each other gold. So gold is a huge deal in India. It's not a recent phenomenon like it is in China. Now, Chinese have always liked gold, but it's only been the last 10, 15 years where they've made a state effort, where the state actually versus India, where the state is actually trying to discourage gold consumption. We'll get into that in a minute. But China is actually encouraging gold consumption of its people, of its institutions, and the People's Bank of China. So what you have in India right now is massive amounts of demand for gold, but you have the government working against it. It ruins their balance of payments, so they put duties on gold. They've been doing that on and off for the past few years. All that does is increase the black market for gold importing. Then they decided, well, if we can't beat them, we can't knock some sense into the Indian people and knock 5,000 years worth of ingrained culture, gold culture, out of them. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring them into the 21st century, and we're going to take gold and we're going to take away the common cut against it, that it doesn't pay interest. You give it to us, give it to the government, and we'll issue a bond that'll give you interest on your gold. And this way, India can tap into the gold riches. There's some statistics out there that are crazy where the Indian people own more gold than most governments.
Yes.
And they own more gold than are in most mines. And there's just a massive amount of gold in the hands of everyday Indians. And also there's a massive demand for it. So you got two things. You got the imports duties. You've got this gold monetization scheme where they're trying to get people to turn in their gold. And it hasn't been very successful. They're on their
third. It's not working at all.
No. And now the latest trick they have now is, okay, well, now we'll put a tax on it. Now, if it's not bad enough, they already tax it when it's coming in the country. Now they want to tax sales of it. So now the jewelers are up in arms and they're saying, you're going to destroy our business. They're going on strike. So you really do see, if you talk about a war on gold, you're seeing it play out in India. And even with that war over the last few years, they back and forth, I think in 2014 or 15, they were the number one gold consumer despite all this discouragement. And every other year, I think China overtakes them. But China's not doing anything to discourage the
acquisition
of gold. Sure.
Yeah,
but India
gobbling
is.
it all up.
So that's the gold story in India, and the silver story is similar, except that silver is not revered. It's more for decorative use, and it's also for industrial, just like anywhere else. There's a massive Indian solar programs that are going on. They're building out large plants and so on. So silver demand, and they haven't placed the same draconian import restrictions on it. Silver demand
Exactly.
in India is massive. I mean, it takes up about 35% of the annual mining supply ends up in India. About 400 million ounces a year end up in India. So both of them are very big. And what's interesting, Rory, which the reason I mentioned 1980 is the amount of silver and gold that are being consumed by China and India are so massive, and they're so new. They didn't exist 15, 20 years ago. And you would think with that type of new demand coming online, which is just enormous, you
Hmm.
would have seen a corresponding increase in price, and you just haven't seen it.
It's not happening. And that's because of the criminals being in charge of the global spot price.
To put it kindly, right?
Yeah, well, and what I wanted to mention is this article that you had sent me, Lewis, from Reuters, and it was from February the 23rd, and it's
Hmm.
India's February gold imports seen at lowest since 2013, high prices drag. And in this article, they mention the Dore bars, and apparently, a Dore bar is a combination of gold and silver, and they are getting past some of the taxes by importing more Dore bars because they're taxed at in a different way. And now all of a sudden, now the question that I have is that silver that's in these Dore gold bars, is that being accounted for in their
Oh, and the import.
overall?
That I don't
Exactly.
know.
You see what it?
Yeah, of course, because the silver imports are already massive. They're
Exactly.
massive whether they include the Dory or they don't include it. But if they don't include it, then they're even bigger.
Exactly. Because it says that India, I'm quoting the article, India imposed a record high duty of 10% in 2013, but instead of curbing imports, the duty revived smuggling networks that brought an estimated 175 tons of gold into India in 2014, or about one fifth of total annual arrival. Nothing that they are doing is working. And all of a sudden, they're now not only are they importing equal amount, a little bit less gold than they were a few years ago, but within that gold, they're bringing in more silver.
But also, Roy, that's officially what you hear bring in. When you were talking, I was thinking this sounds to me just like prohibition. More people were drinking during prohibition probably than ever before,
Exactly.
and the government tried for I don't know 15, 16 years before they finally gave up in 1933. They figured the country's in a depression. They might as well let people drink. But I mean, the 20s, the roaring 20s, were fueled by bootleg liquor, and it was illegal. But they were bringing it in from Canada, and they were making it in their bathtubs. And Indians are finding ways of getting gold because they have the same clamor for gold, I guess, as Americans had for their whiskey.
Well, I mean, and like you said, it's wealth. They recognize it as wealth. All of these schemes that they've been trying to do have not worked. Nothing that they do has worked. And one of the interesting parts is that 2/3 of the gold consumption is in rural
Hmm.
farming India. 2/3.
Yes, and they
So
have no banks there either. So that
exactly. I mean, it's like, well, good luck with that. I mean, it's not. There's nothing that they can do, and there's nothing that they can say or programs that they can put into place that's going to stop it. Because, like you said, it's 5,000 years of culture, and that train is not gonna. It's not gonna stop. It's not
yeah.
even gonna slow down.
And what it highlights, Roy, is if you look at what governments come and go. Not gold. Gold is always there. And
It's always there.
if you're not caught up in Americans may get caught up in the concept of chasing the next best thing because America's a young country. There's always change. But when you're in a rural environment, things don't change that quickly. and you see the same gold pieces handed down from your grandparents going back generations.
Yep.
That's why the Indians aren't going to give that up. They know that governments come and they come and they go. They've seen the English come and go. They've seen socialist governments come and go. They've seen Indira God. They've seen so much that they know that the only thing they can hold on to is the gold, and that's what lasts. And
And that's
that's
been
what,
permanent for that
yeah,
entire 5,000 years.
correct.
So why am I going to give that up? Because
And get something from the Indian government that says they're going to pay me.
yeah, here's a piece of paper for your wealth
Yeah, I'm
for
gonna.
those for that sixth generation gold necklace you've got.
Yeah, I'm still gonna tell your daughter to put that around her neck. See if that works.
Oh, and what the other thing that I wanted to discuss is this piece that Koos Jansen put out yesterday, and it's called Kazakhstan and China Join Forces in Gold Market. And the interesting part about this is that he has a chart in this article, and it shows Kazakhstan and China's official gold reserves beginning in January 2011 is when this chart starts. We see that they have about 60, what looks like Kazakhstan has about 60 tons. And then beginning in October, November time frame, it goes up to about 90 tons. And from there, as of probably January of this year, they had around 225 tons. So almost a threefold, well, it is a threefold increase since January 2011 in the past 5 years. And China, as we all know, they've increased their holdings by roughly 700 tons.
Right. Officially, the People's Bank of
Officially,
China, the People's Bank
yes.
of China has reported an increase. That doesn't include all the gold they may have at subsidiary banks, investment trust funds, or within the hands of the individuals in the country.
Yeah, now just looking at the other areas that China could be storing gold, it could be a lot more, but we're not going to get into that.
Right.
The question that I have is that why would a country the size of Kazakhstan increase their gold holdings by roughly threefold over the course of the past 5 years, and now they're joining forces with China along the Silk Road, unless there is a program that is developing in the background to use gold.
Well, there is, and he reminded me. I haven't covered this area in a while, but there was a China Gold Fund set up back, and I'm looking at my site. Or back, I published something on May 23rd, 2015, how the Shanghai Gold Exchange in about 60 countries along the Silk Road economic belt raised about $16 billion for a gold-based fund. Okay, and Kazakhstan is right smack in the middle of that. And then I'm looking at, I published the top 40 gold holding countries. Kazakhstan is now number 23, and I have about 200 some odd tons of gold, which is amazing because, like you mentioned, they were down around 90. And why would a country that has very little wealth be, adding gold to reserves? And the reason you have reserves normally is for your balance of payments. And most
Exactly.
countries have small percentages, the Western countries, as a percentage of reserves, other than Italy and France, because historically in Germany they still have a lot of gold. But a country like Canada, as a percentage of reserves, is basically none. Now the United States supposedly has a high percentage of reserves in gold for two reasons. One, they had a lot of gold, or supposedly they had a lot of gold in the 50s, and they supposedly still have it. And the United States doesn't need to hold a lot of gold reserves, a lot of reserves in general, because they can print the money on an on-demand basis as needed. So the reserves are not important. But for countries that are trading around the world, Rory, they need to have sufficient reserves in order to either sell those reserves to bolster their currencies, or to sell, to use as to buy dollars, or they actually hold dollars so that they can buy oil in the international market. But what you're pointing out, Rory, is why hold gold in an excess of what your possible demand payments are, unless you plan to use that gold?
Exactly, and I don't think they're
Is
going
that
to
is
use
that
it
is
for.
that what you're getting at?
That's exactly what I'm getting at, and they're not they're not going to be using it to make more trinkets or jewelry. I mean, they're not. I mean, and why would they be joining forces? Quote, joining forces with China in a gold market. Oh, and where are they located? Smack dab in the middle of the new Silk Road.
Right.
Who else is acquiring gold over there? Maybe Belarus, maybe Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan,
And
and
Russia's right smack in there too.
oh yeah, those guys too. They're acquiring a lot of gold as well.
And you think about what Russia does with their gold, they're the number 2 gold mining country. I think I sent you a chart on this. And what they do is they take their rubles, because they're not as useful as reserves to hold rubles for international trade. So they basically buy up about 75% of their domestic mining production and they throw it into gold.
Exactly.
And then they have gold reserves increasing. So it's a very smart thing to do. China eats up its entire 450 tons a year and puts that into, and that's why the People's Bank of China is understating that the gold has to be elsewhere, because if you just take the last 4 years of mining production, it's more than they have publicly stated in their reserves. If you take 450 tons of gold every year for 4 or 5 years, you're over 2,000 tons, and they only claim to have about 1,700.
Right, which is, where's the other 1,700?
Yeah, and
Where's the other 2,000 because they last reported their gold holdings was 2010, right? Their official gold holdings, it was
2009, and then they
2009. Okay,
then they added 640 tons. They got them up to about it was about 1,700, and now they're at about 1,788.
Yep, just under 1,800. So
yeah,
but from 2009 to 2015, for those 5.5 years,
they added 600 tons. Come on,
where did all that gold go?
By the way, that's only the domestic. Even if you just take the domestic, they should have the domestic mining production. They should have more than they reported, but then all the imports that we know about through Hong Kong, and then all the imports we don't have numbers on through Shanghai.
Exactly.
So there's tons of gold literally in China, and my suspicion is just with other People's Bank of China subsidiary banks. It's just not on the official People's Bank of China's balance sheet.
I think it's going to be very interesting because a couple of months ago, or I'm sorry, just a few weeks ago, we hear of the new Silk Road making its first delivery into Tehran by train. And now, yesterday we learned that China and Kazakhstan, once again, new Silk Road, they're talking about gold. So the first 2 pieces of information, 50% of what we've learned just in the past couple of weeks pertains to gold.
I'll give you a third one, Rory. If you think about what's happening with oil, we're talking about Russia, OPEC, all these countries, they want to do an oil freeze, but who doesn't want to do an oil freeze? You mentioned Iran. Why doesn't Iran want to do an oil freeze? Because they're just starting to come out of the sanctions. They're ramping up production, and they're shipping their first shipments into the massive market of Europe. So there's another angle there, too, where the Silk Road meets the West, because it comes through Iranian oil. And that's why Iran does not want to go for. They'll freeze. Once they get back, maybe 3 times more. They start shipping 3 times more. Maybe they'll be in favor of a freeze, but not right now. They want to ship more and then get the price higher, and then maybe they'll consider a freeze.
Maybe, because they already have 2. They already have China as a customer.
Mm-hmm.
So what do they care about what's happening in the West? They don't.
What they care about, Rory, is it's a massive market, and they had been shut out of that market because of sanctions, and now that market is open to them. So they want to penetrate that market.
Well, but my point is that if the very first announced shipment along the new Silk Road, the destination was Tehran, Iran, that should be a huge signal, not only to Iran, but to the rest of the world, that the new Silk Road is going through Iran, and everybody along that route will be using their oil.
Mm-hmm.
So they already have a new market built in. They already have new customers. They already
Oh, and they can
have this
and
huge infrastructure that's going to support them. They
and
don't
they
care
can
about Europe.
well, you always care about an additional market, but through the Silk Road, they can actually accept gold as payment
Exactly.
and not have to worry about euros, dollars, and so on. But you never throw away an additional market. I mean,
Well,
the reason they fought the sanctions was that's what they wanted. They wanted to open up even more trade. Now they were smart while they were doing the sanctions, trying to get them lifted by looking east and creating these ties with the Silk Road as well.
only thing I can say is that if you're not watching what's going on with the Silk Road, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Eurasian Economic Union, and the BRICS and the AIIB, then you're going to miss what's going to happen, because that's where it seems to be unfolding pretty regularly. I mean, I wish that we would have these kinds of stories coming out about the West, where the United States and the UK, have put together some kind of program, or the United States and Canada, but we don't hear that. The
Right,
only thing,
you're making a very good point because I like to say that Nixon and Kissinger, for all their faults, they were geopolitical geniuses. Think about the petrodollar; that is a genius scheme. But right now, all the genius schemes are in Asia, the Asia Infrastructure Bank, the Silk Road, and the United States is still clinging to. Basically, it's become an outdated model because they don't have the same geopolitical clout over the partners that make the petrodollar necessary.
it's because they bullied them. It's because they
Correct.
raped and pillaged their economies and their people. And now, well, if you don't do what we say, we'll just bomb you. I mean,
And
who
that's
wants to
very
do
expensive.
that?
No, and Rome was smart enough to know that that's not the way to run an empire. And China is making a lot of empire moves, but not through military
Exactly, through
by making
business.
these deals. I mean, the Asia Infrastructure Bank is a big deal. It gets scoffed at in the West, but remember they have these what are they called? They have the Chinese International Payment System, the SIPs. They've got the creation of the yuan clearing banks. They got the yuan swap facilities to create yuan liquidity. They've sold some of the U.S. Treasury bonds. So that is de-dollarization, in action and in very concrete terms.
Yep.
It's not hyperbole. They're setting up an alternative system to use the yuan. Now, everyone scoffs at it and says, well, it's not at the same level of the dollar. Well, not yet.
Not
And
yet.
it's not a Jim Willie thing where, I think he predicted the dollar died last year or 2 years ago, but it is something that is happening. I mean, when you have an increasing economy and you have increasing world trade and you have a currency, it runs through these hiccups. And everyone's saying it's not a problem right now in the United States. The dollar is strong. That's only because people are paying attention to not the macro trend, but the little micro blips in
What's
what's happening
happening next
when
week?
monetary. Exactly. Janet Yellen will talk today. Maybe she'll
Right.
strengthen the dollar by threatening a rate hike or so on. But that doesn't change the inexorable rise of China. China's growth is not 9% this year; it's 6%. Oh, what's the United States growth rate? It's nothing.
Well, and let's look at that 6%. If you have an economy that is continually growing, which means that you're bringing on more business and more employees and producing more product, doesn't that impact the overall growth? As in, is that 6% growth based on 3 million companies as opposed to 9% growth based on 2 million companies?
Exactly.
You know what I
And
mean?
you
So
have to slow growth. But the larger you get, it's harder to grow at the same pace.
exactly. It's because you're growing, because you're getting bigger and things are changing. So
And there's
that's
growing pains, and there's sometimes you have to take a break, and other times where you're gonna have to take a step back too. But
yeah.
that doesn't change the macro trend of the rise of China.
I just wonder what's going to happen when they start in earnest, doing away with 6 million coal workers. That's
Well, I think you mentioned a podcast earlier. Probably the solar is meant to displace the coal, and therefore they should be, a transition of workers from coal to solar.
Hopefully they'll, because that's a lot of folks.
What
That's a
China
lot of
has to be
people.
aware. People management is probably harder for them than monetary management.
Well,
You know,
when you have that many,
yeah,
that's
and
a lot of
and
mouths.
they also what they had was akin far more than what we had. Yeah, we had in the 50s a lot of migration from the south up to the northern cities of Chicago and so on to do labor, but they had in the hundreds of millions leaving the farms and moving into those cities. I don't know if you've
Yep.
seen those dramatic photos of Shanghai in the 80s compared to what it looks like today. It looked like some little sleepy river town. And now it's a megalopolis, and there are those types of cities all over China, populated and unpopulated.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've got like 20 cities that are 10 million plus.
Right, right.
I
They've
mean,
got like New
that's
York's in every region.
everywhere.
Yeah,
Yeah, everywhere. So,
and those are people who their parents or when they were kids, they were running around in a rural area, without running water,
yep.
and now they're working in a high rise.
Right. That's
It's a dramatic. I mean, you
that
talk
is
about
dramatic
the
change.
the rise, and then you say, well, the growth is only 6%. It's like, well, just take a look back where they were.
Yep. And well, once again, what's
But
that
one
six
thing I
percent measured against? And
exactly
that's what you have to. For me, that's what you have to look at, because if it's 9% growth based on 2 million and it's 6% growth based on 3 million, that's
yeah, it's.
that's a big deal.
But what's interesting, I don't know. You mentioned how China kind of doesn't fully disclose, or maybe they fully disclose it. They disclose what they ask. How much does the People's Bank of China have, and they tell you this is what's in the People's Bank of China. They don't say, oh, by the way, all our other gold is over
In
here.
our safe account.
Yeah. But one thing that is interesting, and I don't know if it has anything to do with the upcoming yuan fix in April, but the amount that the People's Republic of China, the National Bank of China, reported in February was the lowest since they started reporting back in June. Because they had reported, if memory serves me, I think close to 10 tons in February. And prior months were like 16, 19, 21, 15, 19, ever since they started monthly reporting. This reflected a big drop. Also, in the Shanghai Gold Exchange, they stopped the weekly reporting and they've
Right.
only reported the monthly, but the 2 months that they've reported now are at levels, back to 2011 and 12. And Nick Laird from ShareLinks, he has been, he's a gold researcher, and he's kind of dedicated his life to becoming the godfather of precious metals charts. He does a fabulous job. You can go and see a site at ShareLinks and subscribe for about 50 cents a day, and you can get more charts and understanding of the market you could ever want. But what he's done is he's gone into, because China has stopped producing easy to find data on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. He goes into the Shanghai Gold Exchange or site, the Chinese language site, and finds the data. But the data that he's finding is showing the last 2 months have not been as robust. We had a record year in 2015 in Shanghai Gold Exchange, about 2,600 tons withdrawn. And the last 2 months we've had in January and February are not at the same level of last year and not at the same level of the last couple of years. So I don't know if it's a trend starting. The People's Bank of China is not reporting as much or just not adding as much gold. And the Shanghai Gold Exchange withdrawals also seem to be lower. So I want to keep an eye on that as we go forward, Rory, to see if March, April, and May maybe reverse that trend. But it's
Or maybe they feel comfortable with the volume of gold that they have, and
well, it could be.
you
Or it could
know,
be if they wanted to get more, maybe it's more expensive. But the thing is, we know that adding the amounts that they're adding now are they can get from their domestic mining supply very easily. So
very
maybe,
easily.
so maybe they're just diverting it elsewhere, and they don't, as you say, they don't need to add much more gold now. They're already the fifth largest gold holding nation. They're larger than the UK. They still have less. They're in the SDR. So I think if they wanted to roll up the gold, if they ever needed it for any real reason, it could easily be rolled up, or they already have enough as it is, as in gold reserves.
Also, April the 19th, they're going to start pricing gold in yuan.
Right, and that was my question: was are they slowing down in anticipation of some type of surprise, or are they just trying not to draw attention to themselves? I don't know. What I'm saying is there might be a trend going on where there's less activity on the Shanghai Gold Exchange leading up to the yuan fix, and they may be adding less gold going forward to the official reserves. I don't know if it's a trend yet, but we've seen January and February numbers lower, not dramatically lower, but significantly lower.
Wow.
On the Shanghai Gold Exchange.
It will definitely be interesting, and that seems like a good place for us to end this session there, Lewis.
All right, Roy. Well, thanks for having me on again.
Well, I certainly appreciate all the knowledge, and we'll pick back up in a couple of weeks, Lewis, and look at the premiums and so forth. And
we'll look at the U.S. Mint and numbers. I should have Canadian numbers too. They publish very late, so we should have full 2015 numbers probably next couple of weeks, if not the following show we do on the silver demand.
Okay, that sounds good. And it's, as always, my name is Rory, and with the Daily Coin, and Louis Camarasano joining me from smallgold.com. Louis, I certainly appreciate the knowledge and the time.
Thank you very much, Roy.
We'll talk with you soon.
Excellent.